Today's guest is Dr. John Nieters, and he is a functional medicine and Chinese medicine practitioner. So he has a unique view and practice of Eastern and Western medicine. When I went to prepare for this interview, I had so many different questions because he is a wealth of knowledge and speaks on so many different topics. We only get to about half my questions, so I look forward to part 2 of this interview. But Dr. Nieters also has a book out. It's called The Sweet Spot. You're definitely going to want to check that out. I will link to everything he has. Get ready for an interview that gives so much information. And what I love about it is it's not expensive to do. He gives solutions that are they cost pennies and they can be so effective. And he gives us the science behind why they work. Welcome to Be the Person podcast. Who's the person you're being? Are you satisfied? Welcome to Be the Person, a podcast for the brave and the curious, for people ready to explore their true potential. I'm your host, Annie Randall. Join me and let's get ready to go on this journey together. Welcome to Be the Person podcast. I cannot wait for you to hear from today's guest, Dr. John Nieters. He is, I would call him a jack of all trades because when I went to do these questions, I had so many for him and we are going to jump all over the place, but that's because he has so many answers and I'm excited for you to hear about him today. Welcome, Dr. John, to the podcast.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks for welcoming me. Yeah, it was great. I was really looking forward to this morning. I like the way you approach the interviews.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's start off and just let's tell the audience a little bit about you. I know that you really focus in Chinese medicine. Would love to know about your background and how you got into that.
Yeah. Now, I have to warn you, I was doing a TV interview a few years ago, and the interviewer said, well, I looked at your bio and I'd like to ask you questions about A, B, and C. Is that okay? And I said, yeah, sure. So then she opened the interview asking the same question you just asked, and we spent the entire time talking about that. So I'll try to keep it a little more brief here. So I'll start at the beginning. No, actually, I'll start at the end. So I practice traditional Chinese medicine as well as being certified in functional medicine. And functional medicine's kind of a hot topic these days. It's really looking at medical lab tests and treatments from a non-standard, meaning everyday Western approach. And so with functional medicine, we're mostly looking at what's going to keep you healthy. I mean, if you're sick, just as in Chinese medicine, we want to help you get well. However, the goal of functional medicine and traditional Chinese medicine both is to keep you in the sweet spot. That area, for example, on your lab tests, you'll see a standard range on a common set of labs that you do at LabCorp, one of the other major labs in the country, and it'll say standard range or reference range. Well, within that range, there's a sweet spot. For example, with blood sugars, hemoglobin A1C is often used as an overall measurement. Well, in Western medicine, they say if you get over 5.6, you're pre-diabetic. If you get over 6.4, then you're diabetic. And they have these numbers. But really, the sweet spot for hemoglobin A1C is 5.0 to 5.2. So that's a big difference. And so if we can keep you in the sweet spot, it's going to lower inflammation. It's going to drastically reduce cardiovascular and stroke risk. So we really are aiming in both cases, the TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, and functional medicine, we're both aiming to keep you in the sweet spot. And if you get out of it, really to look at more natural, less intrusive, less dangerous ways of treating that to get you back into the sweet spot. Now, for both of us, I mean, if someone needs, surgery or medication, that happens. But we want it to happen as seldom as possible, and we want the fix to be really simple without harming people. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. And I do a lot of teaching. I've been teaching for years, traditional Chinese medicine and functional medicine now for about 25 years. But I think I'll go back to the beginning. So I was born on International Women's Day. My mom was a incredible human being, wonderful, loving woman, but she had a few demons. And she got electroshock for schizophrenia when I was a little kid. And it was very clear to me once I got old enough to understand these things that I was really her emotional anchor. I was an only child for over a decade. My dad wasn't there for her emotionally. He was a war hero. He got medals in World War II in Korea for bravery. But like a lot of men from that generation that went through those wars, he was not emotionally available. And I don't know when it happened, but at some point I became aware that I was, people say this is a little strange, but it seemed to me that I was actually born to help my mom. And I also developed this feeling of how I wanted to be in the world, what I wanted to do, not specifically, but how I wanted that to feel and what effect I wanted it to have on people. So I tried pre-med and I saw how unhealthy the people in the internships were, et cetera. I read that doctors are always in the top 10 for suicides, usually in the top 3 or 4, and they're not happy. So I said, I don't really need that. I don't think I can maximally help people. Then I later became a psych major at Berkeley. And after a year of that, it became formed that at least that form of psychology wasn't really for me. Now, before I went to Berkeley, I was at UC Santa Barbara. I'd been a high school athlete for sports, went to Santa Barbara and became a total couch potato. I did nothing but drink beer and eat junk food. Gained a lot of weight, but I got up for a rousing game of ping pong and blew out 2 discs in my back. It was just insane. So my friends basically had to carry me to student health, and I had to get people to help me get to a second opinion. And they both agreed I had to have surgery. And, very threatening. If you don't have this surgery, you won't be able to walk in a few years. Okay. Well, I had one friend. I came home. Most of my friends at that time, because I played a lot of sports, were what we would call jocks, right? But I had one friend, Stuart McClay, and he was totally eclectic. He was the president of the chess club. He was the president of the physics club. And he collected Roman coins, the stuff that none of my other friends did, right? Well, I told him what was going on. He said, oh, now this is the early 70s. He said, you should go get acupuncture. And I said, what the heck is acupuncture? And he said, well, you remember the old Kung Fu TV show where they stick needles into people? I said, are you totally nuts? I'm not going to go in and have someone stick needles in me. And very Stuart McClay-like, he said, oh, okay, so you're going to go in and let a surgeon take a scalpel and carve up your spine. Okay, I'll try acupuncture. So I went to see Y.C. Chong in Berkeley, who was a master of the excellences, as they call them. His paintings now sell for a fortune. He was the best herbalist I've ever seen, and his Tai Chi and martial arts were flawless. At 83 years old, he was doing these flying acrobatic moves. But anyway, he looked at me and he shook his finger at me and he said, you don't need surgery. You take my classes. So I started doing Tai Chi and Qigong. This was in the mid 70s, early 70s, actually. Completely changed my diet. He got me drinking tea instead of coffee, and he gave me herbal formulas. And I'm 73 years old, and I'm going to knock on wood here. I have not had back surgery, and I have zero back pain. But the really significant thing, or at least another significant thing about meeting with Dr. Chong is that in my life, I'm not much of a writer. And, in terms of recording things, only 2 occasions in my life have I written what one could call a diary page. And one was after meeting this brilliant acupuncturist. And basically, it was a couple pages, but it basically said, I want to be just like him. I want to master martial arts, herbology. I want to treat people with that same level of love and empathy, although he was pretty intense. I got that he was doing it for me. And so I knew that was what I wanted to do. So I studied Tai Chi and Qigong for years. I studied herbs. I wanted to go back to school then a little later to study acupuncture to get a license to actually put needles in people. But I owned a real estate company. I had 3 children and a wife. So it just, it was just too hard. But then my life thinned out a little bit. And I got a call from my dad who'd moved to North Dakota. and said he was feeling bad and he had a doctor's appointment and he wanted me to go with him. So I went with him. There's a little clinic in uh, Bismarck, North Dakota. And the guy came out and said, Herman, I have to tell you, you have throat cancer and it's spread up into your brain. And it was funny because he said, well, you must still smoke a lot. My dad said, no, I don't smoke at all. And I said, Dad, you've been chewing tobacco since you were in your teens. And the doctor said, yeah, that's exactly where the tobacco juice would fall. So anyway, we brought him out here. I wasn't a licensed acupuncturist, so I took him to see people that I knew at the school. They made up the most horrible smelling concoction of herbs. I have never smelled anything that bad before or since, but he was feeling better. He's up dancing around. He went to a reunion of his army buddies. My sister drove him back to North Dakota. He went to the doctor, and the doctor said, Herman, this is amazing. Your mass has shrunk by 50%, but we're going to do the surgery anyway. And he died from the surgery. And so that was what really flipped me around. I knew that he was getting better. It was obvious. His tumor had shrunk by 50%, but I had no authority. I couldn't really do anything with that. So that's when I went back to school to get my master's degree. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell.
I love that. I mean, I don't love it because of your dad. Like, that's a heartbreaking story, but I think that's where a lot of people find their giftedness is through pain or through pain of a loss. So I know that you're helping so many people now. I love that you use Chinese medicine along with functional medicine. And when I was preparing for this, I had such a hard time. I've never had this with anyone, but really like figuring out a topic that we could talk to. And then I saw that you were a radio host, which anyone listening, you have the perfect radio voice. And so then I was like, you know what? We're just going to ask all kinds of questions because I had heard you talk on all kinds of topics. So I'm excited to pick your brain from that point, just as far as both Chinese medicine and functional medicine, because that's such a unique blend. So are you up for that if we take that approach today?
Up for it. Let me think for a second. That is the thing I most love in life. I mean, I love my kids, I love my dogs, I love my wife, but professionally, I love working with questions. Back in the mid 80s, I did a really extensive program and I was certified by Tony Robbins, who's, you know, uh, he's been an advisor to many presidents, et cetera. He's a sharp guy. But the saying that he had that most impacted me was the quality of our lives is determined by the quality of our questions. And that has really stuck with me. And he had lists of questions when there was a problem. He had the morning questions. He had the evening questions. And I had laminated cards made up in 1988, a lot of them. And I noticed I'm almost out of them because I gave one of them to one of my patients this week who was struggling. And it really helps us focus on getting out of the problem, in a way that's positive. So yeah, the radio show was fun for 10 years. People called from all over the world, Australia, India, Canada. I remember Tatiana from Moscow would come with this great accent, right? And there was one guy who I still see. He'd call every week and he'd play Stump the Acupuncturist. Really smart guy. And he asked questions that, these were not normal questions. So anyway, I got to the point where I just loved it. And you know what? It made me a better practitioner because I was forced, whether I wanted to research and study things or not, I had to, because people were going to call with the most off the wall but important questions. So yeah, let's go for it.
Awesome. I love that. I think that's what this podcast is all about because I'm a super curious person. I always ask a ton of questions. And so let's dive in. My first one is about apple cider vinegar. I want to know, like, does it work? When and why, if it does, would you use it? And then anything else you want to tell us on apple cider vinegar?
Yeah, several years ago. Now, it's been a while since I did my radio show, but one morning I came in to do the show and I said, supplements are expensive, herbs are expensive. And I know that because I use them myself. And I said, I'm going to tell you how to eliminate 80 to 90% of your illness and disease problems for about a quarter a day. And I said, take apple cider vinegar, about 15 minutes before your meals. Take baking soda about 2 hours after your meals or in the evening, and get in the sun for 15 minutes a day. And still, those things will make such a huge difference. And it's so critical that we are able to draw wisdom from the ancients and their traditions. Yes, medical science is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. There are new things every day. But what they're doing in large measure is coming up with the very complex ways of explaining what the ancients were doing. It's the same thing. I love Sally Fallon, who wrote Nourishing Traditions. And in that book, she went through and outlined how different traditions of people would process their foods. For example, every bean has a different way that it should be processed, and that takes out the lectins, the other anti-nutrients, etc., from the beans. Now, if you just take the beans and you don't do those things, they can be an anti-food. And so if we look at the ancients, and apple cider vinegar was used, I won't say all over the world, but pretty darn close. And they knew it was valuable. But now we do have the advantage of knowing precisely. You can look and find precisely how it affects these different things. So I use it. I've always used it for absorption, right? As we get older, we lose a lot of the acidity in our stomach, and our stomach has to be very acidic to be able to absorb iron, B12, calcium, and a few other things. B12 in particular is very difficult to absorb. You have to have a very acidic stomach to stimulate the parietal cells to release intrinsic factor, which grabs the B12 and carries it all the way through your small intestine until it gets to the receptor sites. Iron, you can't you can see all these charts. So, spinach has tons of iron in it. Yeah, but is it bioavailable? So spinach would require a very, very acidic stomach acid down around 1.5, whereas meat with heme iron doesn't have to be as acidic to pull the iron out. It could have a pH of about 3, which is acidic, but nowhere near 1.5. So it's acidic. It enhances the absorption of iron, B12, and calcium. That's why cultures have all discovered marination, where you're putting an acidic substance and soaking your meat or whatever else in it. So it's great for absorption. It's also great for blood sugar control. It improves the insulin responses to blood sugar, which help regulate the blood sugar levels. And so also then for weight loss, it can actually help increase feelings of fullness and reduce calorie intake. It actually works somewhat on the GLP-1 system that we're seeing drugs for, but you can do a lot of the same thing with apple cider vinegar. It also reduces an enzyme that helps break complex carbs down to simple carbs and sugars. So you don't absorb the sugars, they pass through you. I mean, you absorb some, but not as many. And you'll see a 25 to 35 point reduction in postprandial blood sugar, or blood sugar levels after you eat a meal. 25 to 35 points is pretty significant. And then you get to bloating. Again, low acid medium is a problem for bloating. And so apple cider vinegar helps by killing bacteria in the stomach and intestines, also fungus a little bit. Heart health, because it lowers blood sugar, it lowers inflammation, it helps B12 levels. Bone health, because it helps with iron and calcium. And iron is often overlooked at the importance of having proper iron levels for bone health. Either too low an iron level or too high an iron level can interfere with bone production. Gut health, again, it contains acetic acid, which kills harmful bacteria. And it has natural probiotics, which can improve gut health. We even use it for women with severe bloating, cramps, irritability caused by PMS. And again, it does that by all the things I just mentioned. So yeah, it's an amazing health food. It's now one of my big 4 probably health foods, I would say.
So would you say, like, as far as dosing, is it a tablespoon with some water? You said 15 minutes before the meal, or
Yeah,
what was the
probably the ideal is 2 tablespoons, But again, it's dose dependent. So even a teaspoon is helpful. They now you can buy apple cider vinegar, and they call it, I forget what they call it. Oh gosh, tasting vinegar. I don't remember, but it's mixed with honey. So it's really easy to get down. You can just pour out a couple tablespoons of that and it's not a problem. I usually have people put between 1 and 2 tablespoons in some water, and they're usually fine with that.
Okay. You mentioned something else that I have not heard before, and that was baking soda at night. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I really started thinking about this years ago. I do a lot of internal medicine and I see people that are either in or going into kidney failure. And there's a number that is used called small e, capital G, capital F, capital R, EGFR. And that's estimated glomerular filtration rate. And this one actually has numbers that are agreed upon. So if you're over 60, you're considered not at risk. And then you go into stage 3A kidney failure from 45 to 60, stage 3B, and so on. And that's a way to measure the effectiveness of your kidneys. Well, it was fascinating. I noticed that MDs were giving patients baking soda when their EGFR showed that they were in stage 4 kidney failure. And I thought, well, why not start it earlier, right? Because the baking soda is a buffer. So the kidneys hate acidity. They just can't stand acidity. Uric acid just tears them up. And so if you can alkalinize your blood, you are going to have a step up. In fact, when the contents of the stomach go into the small intestine, it stimulates a whole bunch of things to get released. It causes the release of bile from the gallbladder, lipase, amylase from the pancreas, but also there's a huge release of bicarbonate of soda or baking soda, because that mass of food that's come down from these, from the stomach is very acidic. You need it to be acidic, but now it needs to become alkaline. So there's a jolt of baking soda that gets released. Excuse me. And so if you do the baking soda, and particularly before bed, it can help with acid indigestion, where there's usually not too much stomach acid. It is too much, but it's too weak. And so the stomach keeps pumping more and more stomach acid, which is too weak to do the job. So the baking soda will neutralize that. So it has a two-part benefit. It alkalinizes the body, which helps everything, including the kidneys, and it will reduce the need for antacids. So it's amazing for literally pennies a day, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And what would be the dosing recommendation there?
the studies were done. Well, I'll tell you what I recommend. I recommend about a third of a teaspoon. If that doesn't help, then do another third of a teaspoon. The caveat is that it does have sodium in it. And so in people that are sodium sensitive, so if I get a patient with borderline or malignant high blood pressure, I don't use this. In that case, I use potassium bicarbonate. I think it's slightly less effective, but it will still get the bicarbonate in. And so people with low blood pressure, I love sodium bicarbonate because a little bit of sodium can help get their blood pressure up.
Okay, very good. Do you feel like you need an adventure or a new challenge in 2025? Join Jeff and I on our Peru trip. We're going to do a one-day hike to Machu Picchu. It's always been on my bucket list, but it's becoming more and more restricted. So right now you can still walk around Machu Picchu, but I believe that won't be the case for long. We're also going to explore the Amazon jungle, the city of Lima, have the option to hike Rainbow Mountain. It's going to be a wonderful trip. It happens next September. See all the full details in the show notes. You mentioned that it really reduces blood sugar, and I saw that when I wore a glucose monitor. I did a ton of testing on myself. There was another supplement that came up, Berberine, for much the same reason. It had the same effect if you ate it before a meal. What is your thoughts on that supplement?
I'm excited that naturopaths and functional medicine doctors have discovered berberine. Now, berberine is found in a few plants. Mostly in a really commonly used herb in Chinese medicine called Coptis or it's Coptis huanglian, and it's very similar to golden seal. And so that was a major source. But there are a bunch of herbs called the quote yellows, and they're all yellow in color. Those herbs are all used as antibacterial and antifungal herbs. And, it's hard for people to get their head around why these would be so effective. But if you just think about it for a moment, it couldn't be more obvious. These are all roots. Roots are in the ground surrounded by trillions of bacteria that are trying to eat them, trillions of viruses that are trying to invade them, massive amounts of fungi that are trying to use them as food. So these herbs have developed incredibly powerful antivirals, antibacterials, and antifungals. And so it only stands to reason that they'd be effective. Well, I don't know when it happened originally. I know the Chinese had isolated this a while ago, and they had a supplement called Huanglian Su, which meant pharmaceutical grade Huanglian. And then people started doing research and found that they could extract berberine, which is one of the alkaloids, one of the I don't know how many hundreds of alkaloids. And so it was isolated, and they found it had a dramatic effect on blood glucose in the same way that metformin does. In fact, to me, metformin and Coptis, huanglian, berberine are pretty much on the same playing field, same level. I prefer berberine, although metformin actually as a drug isn't a bad drug. It has some interesting benefits, but we'll use berberine a lot. And in my training in China, I was in the first group of Westerners to work in the new plan that they'd created in China for diabetes care. Now, China, as you know, has a huge population. They are also extremely susceptible to diabetes genetically and for some other reasons. Well, when I was there in 1996, I believe, it was what you would expect. There are 8-lane roads with one lane of traffic. Everybody else was on bicycles or walking, etc. And the restaurants were pretty much traditional Chinese restaurants. But when I went back in the mid 2000s, I guess 2008, it was 8 lanes jammed with cars. Very few people walking, very few people on bicycles. And about every third store was a Kentucky Fried Chicken or some Western store. So we had completely co-opted them to our very, very dangerous way of life. And so diabetes rates were soaring. And so the government got together and they said, what do we need to do? Now, it's fascinating. If a group like that were formed in the United States, the primary players at the table would be the pharmaceutical companies. And then you'd see, medical doctors, et cetera. In China, they got MDs from every branch of medicine that would treat diabetics, foot doctors, blood sugar doctors, endocrinologists, eye doctors, kidney doctors, and they had one of each on the panel. And then they had acupuncturists and herbalists and the other people and dietitians. And they came up with a diabetes care plan that is 100 times better than what is doing here, what we do here. I've been a member of the National Diabetes or American Diabetes Association, and I get a lot of their journals. And 90% of the time when they talk about diabetes, they talk about blood sugar control. In China, they don't say control, they say cure, because they expect you to get well. And the systems that they use would blow doctors' minds here. Every hospital has diabetes day, right? So all the diabetics from that hospital will come in like on a Friday morning once a month, and they will have, when they come in, they get a blood draw. Then they sit through a few hours of presentations. They'll have one on new exercise theories or new ways to get exercise. The day I was there, it was line dancing, which was really fun, and they get everybody up line dancing. And then they'll get a presentation on seasonal eating and shopping. And then they'll have someone get up and talk about diabetes care in general. Okay, well, what does that do? It creates cohort. You have these people with their friends sitting in the audience, and they do the line dancing, and a bunch of people will get together and go, "Hey, let's start meeting up every morning at 7 in the park and do line dancing." You can imagine what that does. And then they'd say, "Well, let's go shopping together and we'll cook some meals together." So that cohort idea is so powerful. Then they reinforce that one time a month. And so in the US, in the journals, it's very clear. The more often people see their providers for diabetes, the faster they recover. But we're not set up on that system. You go see your endocrinologist once a month, once a year, maybe twice a year, and it doesn't work very well. So yeah, it's berberine. Let's go back to berberine. That's one of the two most common things that I will advise in terms of, I call it an herb, even though it's an extract, that I will use for diabetes care.
What about, would you recommend, let's say somebody's going out, they know they're going to do a high carb meal or something that's going to spike blood sugar. Maybe they're out at a restaurant, so apple cider vinegar isn't available. In that case, would berberine be a supplement that you could use because you know it will lower control blood sugar?
Absolutely. Although we give our patients, we have available apple cider vinegar capsules so that if they do get in that situation, they can just pop one out of their purse or out of their pocket and take one. But yeah, berberine it is very helpful in that situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. I know right now inflammation is really, it's a big topic. I think it has been for a lot of years, but there's so much research showing that inflammation dictates how we age. And one of the blood tests used that I've used in the past is a CRP blood test. But
Mhm.
I'm just curious because you do a lot of blood testing. Is that one you use? And then overall treatments with Chinese herbs or other recommendations for inflammation?
Okay, now this is one that we could talk about for a weekend because
Yeah.
inflammation is everything. The Chinese identified this. I wrote a book which has not been published because it got too big and I couldn't get through the editing. And it was entitled More Precious Than Gold for the Health of Our Children. And it talked about how to identify inflammation even in infants. And there's something that we call latent heat. That's where something gets trapped in the body can be stimulated by a virus. It can be stimulated by a vaccine. It can be stimulated by many things. But you can actually see the signs of that on the child when they're very, very young. And I'll have my patients bring in their patients, bring in their children when they're going to have them go get vaccinated. And I will just look at their tongue and I'll say, okay, yeah, if that's what you want to do, this is a good time. Or no, absolutely do not. Because just looking at the tongue, you can see the indicators of inflammation and a variety of other things that tell you whether this is a good or not a good time to vaccinate or to do many other things. And so it's everything. It's at the core of Chinese medicine. Heat, heat, heat. You'll see it everywhere. Heat clearing herbs, toxic heat clearing herbs, damp heat clearing herbs. And so they were on this over 2,000 years ago. And I did a 15-week or taught a 15-week continuing education class recently on cardiology, where I blew up a ton of myths. For example, and this is not one of the biggies that I blew up, but high cholesterol alone doesn't cause heart attacks or strokes. It's high cholesterol with inflammation that causes the heart attacks and in the future. And so you can prove it with the science. A relatively recent discovery. Now, they used to think that the blood vessels were basically hollow tubes. And I mean, think that up until, fairly recently, mid 1900s. But then they discovered the glycocalyx. And so you've got these arteries, which are massively strong organs, very thick. That's why we don't do blood draws from the arteries. It's too hard. And so those arteries are constantly pumping to assist in blood flow. Now, lining those arteries is a very thin layer called the endothelium. It's one cell thick, and it's inflammation of the endothelium that really causes the problems. So you can have viral problems, you can have bacterial problems, you can have fungal problems, etc. Like to me, the most proximal cause of most cholesterol issues are bacteria from the mouth. and doing dental procedures. You have to be very careful. And they can find those bacteria in the plaques when they remove cholesterol from arteries, right? So it's right in the middle of the whole thing. So that glycocalyx is very trippy when you see it under electron microscope. It looks like a kelp forest. It's just waving, blowing with the blood flow, right? Blood's going up, it stops. It goes up, it stops. And that glycocalyx is what protects the endothelium. It's what grabs the viruses, grabs the cholesterol, actually, or whatever the bad stuff is, and sweeps it out of the arteries. And it's in healing the glycocalyx that most of the benefits come for preventing cardiovascular health. So you lower inflammation, you lower blood sugar, you lower uric acid, which we haven't talked about, and you heal the glycocalyx, and heart disease risks, it essentially approaches zero. And, there's a recent study came out and showed that by doing just three very simple, very inexpensive tests, you can predict female heart attacks 30 years ahead of time. And those are LDL, which almost all doctors run, low density lipoprotein, and get frantic about it. But remember, it's really an antioxidant. So only about 10% of cholesterol is dietary. The rest of it is created in the liver, and it's actually an antioxidant. It's trying to protect you. But if things are far enough out of balance, it will get stuck in your arterial walls and becomes dangerous. So LDL, lipoprotein A, which is a subfraction of lipoprotein, low density lipoprotein, and that is the genetic form of high cholesterol problems. And so when you see heart attacks, primarily from blockages through a family, granddad, dad, daughter, son, etc., then you suspect lipoprotein A. And that lipoprotein is not really affected by statin drugs. In fact, there are no drugs to effectively treat that. Now, there are a couple, I think 3, but for sure 2, that are in the pipeline, but they haven't made it through trials yet. I'm a little suspicious about the way they work, but anyway, there is no drug at this point. However, there are about a dozen different supplements that we can do, and they're the usual suspects: turmeric, resveratrol, fish oil, etc. That partially how those work is by lowering lipoprotein A levels. Who knew, right? And then the third thing is, you mentioned CRP, C-reactive protein, which the regular C-reactive protein tests that doctors often run is measuring systemic inflammation. We're more concerned with HS, high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which is sometimes called cardiac C-reactive protein, which actually measures the inflammation in the heart and the arteries. So you take those 3 tests and it will predict female heart attacks 30 years in advance. So, whoa, you get those in line and you fix the glycocalyx and you got it going on.
And you recommended, there are a lot of different Chinese herbs to do that. Any other recommendations? You mentioned uric acid, but that, like, for all people that think they have high inflammation, that would be a good idea for them.
Uric acid is the most important. One of my favorite books right now. And over here on this wall, I keep my bottom section of books are things that I want to show to my patients and maybe suggest that they get it and read it or get an Audible book, because it helps really reinforce things. And one of my favorites now is called Drop Acid, right? And in the first, in the Audible, it says, now, if you're a child of the 60s, this doesn't mean what you may think. What it means is drop your uric acid levels. And it is mind-blowing. Turns out there was a Scottish doctor in 1892, I believe, who published a treatise on the dangers of uric acid. 1892. It went through 7 reprints. It was incredibly popular, and then everybody forgot about it. And in it, Alexander Haig, this doctor, said that uric acid is the primary driver between high blood pressure, diabetes, heart attack, stroke, and overweight. And he explained how it worked, but not with the level of scientific rigor we have now. He just knew it worked. Well, I forgot his name, Perlmutter, has written this book, Drop Acid, where he not only looks at, Haig's work and other work, but he gives all the science behind why uric acid is such a horribly dangerous thing. Now, we usually associate uric acid with gout, we associate it with kidney stones, and those are accurate. But on a much more subtle level, it is destroying millions of lives if it's too high. So that's kind of my number one thing I'm looking at right now. By the way, that test costs us $4 to order, and I never see it ordered by MDs unless someone has gout, and even then, they often don't order it. $4. So I would put that in any test panel y'all are doing.
That's a uric acid test?
Yes, uric acid, $4.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had that one done, so I'm interested to see.
Well, I have gout, and I've had kidney stones, and I've had really severe gout where I was in a walker. I could barely move. And so I went to my doctor. I'm 73, so I get my Medicare check. And so he said, okay, you're due for your Medicare labs. Let me write those up for you. Now, he's a bright guy, and I really like him. And he said, okay, here are your labs. And I said, Doc, did you put uric acid on there? And he goes, oh, no. Well, I guess we could. I got gout and kidney stones. Yes, you should. But even more importantly than that, it fuels all these other problems. So, yeah, it's a biggie. It's a biggie. And these tests are very inexpensive. We're not talking breaking the bank type stuff here.
Wow. I think if you're okay with it, I'd like to propose a part 2 of this because I'm only partway through my questions, not even halfway, and we have a lot more to go. And there's a couple things I want to touch on. One, because you just went through your own health journey and then you are publishing a book. Can you just talk to us a little bit about that? Because you made some significant changes in your muscle mass and your health at age 73. And I would love for you to tell us more about that.
Well, thank you. I have Catherine and I, and we're co-writers on these books. And we wrote the one called The Sweet Spot, which was published last year. And we have The Sweet Spot 2 coming out. And those are looking at chemistry panels and blood tests to show the levels that you should be at to stay healthy, not just to stay out of the hospital, but to stay healthy. Well, I didn't follow my own advice. I was either arrogant or ignorant or some combination of both. And I really let my health get out of hand. And, like many people, I use the term too busy to justify all of my bad habits. Well, it turns out my heart got really wonky. And this is actually a really apocryphal story in my mind of, I see a lot of acupuncturists, I train them, and a lot of them just poo-poo Western medicine. And then I will see doctors who think that traditional Chinese medicine and functional medicine are absurd. That's not real medicine. And honestly, the more you combine them and give up the bias and prejudice, the healthier everybody's going to be at much lower cost. So in my case, I got to the point where I was diabetic severely. I was shocked when I got my test. I had severe gout. I had a high blood pressure, and my heart was in atrial flutter. So I found out accidentally because I passed out in a Trader Joe's store here, and they took me to the hospital and they did an EKG, and they didn't say anything to me about the EKG. But when I got my report, it said that I was in atrial flutter, and which means that my chambers of my heart were beating at very different intervals. And so my ventricles, the lower chambers of my heart, were beating at 72 beats a minute. The atria, the upper chambers of my heart, were beating at 288 beats a minute. Now, they obviously should be beating at the same rate. Well, with traditional Chinese medicine and functional medicine, for decades, I'd been treating AFib, atrial fibrillation, very successfully. But this is a whole different animal. It's a much deeper problem where different cells in the heart sending out wrong signals. And so what I did is I found a great cardiologist, love this guy, and he convinced me to do a catheter ablation where they go in through your groin up into the heart, and it's incredible. I mean, I had more sensors on my body. I had 6 people attending to me, putting sensors anywhere you can think of. And so with this method, He went in and they identified which specific cells were sending out the wrong signals, and they ablated them. They killed them. And so I came out of the, it's not a surgery, out of the procedure, I was feeling good. It was all fabulous, but they had to keep me under a long time because I had so many aberrant cells. So they sent me home. Next day, I'm feeling okay. I'm watching a movie with my wife and my son, and slowly but surely, I was getting to the point where I couldn't breathe. And I don't want to go to the emergency room. It's Christmas season. I want to be there with my family. But finally, I couldn't breathe. I said, honey, we need to go to the emergency room. So they took me in. I was diagnosed with congestive heart failure and pneumonia. So I was only 72 then, but anybody in medicine knows that congestive heart failure and pneumonia in a 72-year-old, that's bad news. So, but again, the magic of modern medicine, they saved my life, right? The catheter ablation fixed my heart. The being in the hospital on antibiotics, strong stuff, got rid of my infections. But then they just kind of throw you out on your own. I don't mean throw you out. They were very nice, but you walk out on your own, and I got no advice. I was going to meet with a cardiologist in a few months, but I could have been dead by then. But thank God I'm trained in this stuff and I knew what to do. So I set out, I gave myself a 4-month deadline, and I got to the gym. Catherine, my associate, would bring her dog over every morning at 5:30, and he would stay all day and play with our dogs. And she and I would go to the gym, and we'd go 5 days a week, every morning. I changed my diet. I started sleeping better. I found a better way to sleep for me, and worked out. I started feeling better, of course, but then I realized my testosterone was too low. And so I did a little more research in plants that will increase testosterone levels. So I doubled my testosterone levels in a very short period of time, but to a very safe level. Nothing like if I were taking supplements, testosterone supplements. Well, then I realized that I was kind of plateaued. So I did some research there and really researched, like weight training supplements, and found the ones that I was convinced were safe and effective. In 4 months, I doubled my muscle mass. I doubled my strength in all but one exercise. It was one stubborn exercise that I didn't double it in 4 months. Now, I had worked out before, and so I wasn't a lot weaker than I had been in the 2 years before that, but I doubled everything. And so suddenly I started feeling much better. Life became easier. I checked my high sensitivity C reactive protein. It had gone from astronomical levels down to a low normal. My hemoglobin A1C measure of blood sugar dropped in half to a normal level, and I no longer have gout pain. And that was in 4 months. And so the key to me is you do what works. Find someone that understands, or some ones that understand how to put these things together. Understand that Western medicine is great at heroic interventions, not very good at long-term healthcare. Chinese medicine and functional medicine are both great at long-term care. So again, we got all those things back to normal in just a few months. So that's the story.
I think that is so inspiring because, well, yes, you did add in the things for testosterone. I mean, the majority of it is lifestyle, like your
Yeah.
diet, working out, sleep, things that we know work. But even you, who obviously have so much knowledge, like life gets busy and we put these things to the side sometimes. And you just bringing those back in had such amazing impacts for your health.
Well, thank you for saying that. And even the testosterone was a plant. It was a food. So yeah, all of it was natural actually. So it was, I blew myself away, right? I had this goal, I had a vision, I had these tools, but it worked out even. And here's the thing, Anne, it was simple. It was simple. Since I was a little kid, I dislike the word discipline, right? It made me shake. So I now call it ritual. I created these very simple rituals that made everything very, very simple. I stopped making life difficult. I started making it easy. Is really the thing.
Wow. Well, I would love to come back and do part two. But until we do that, I know people are going to want more information on you, more information from you. What is the best way to get in touch or to do that?
Probably the best way is to go to one of our websites. We have one for the office, but the best one for our training and videos, etc., and to make contact is thebalancingpoint.net. That's thebalancingpoint.net. And there's way too much information on there, but there is a way to get a hold of us and to send us emails and ask questions.
Well, I will make sure I put that in the show notes. And again, I would love to invite you back for part two. But thank you so much for all of your information today. I think it was so helpful. And honestly, so much of it is either free or costs just pennies.
Yeah, that's the truth. And I want to thank you. I love your interviewing style. I love that you let me ramble with my answers, and I would be delighted to come back on the show sometime.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you everyone for joining Be the Person podcast. If this resonated with you or you know somebody that could use the information, please share it with them. And as always, it would mean the world if you would give us a 5-star review. Thanks for joining today.